The wind howls across the wailing dunes of Caelid, carrying with it the acrid stench of decay and something far worse, the memory of what once was. Through the crimson haze that perpetually shrouds this cursed land, a figure emerges that defies all logic, all reason, all understanding of how the world should work. A colossal warrior, his body ravaged by scarlet rot, his mind consumed by madness, charges across the battlefield atop a horse so small that its hooves barely seem to touch the sand. This is General Radahn, once the mightiest of the demigods, now reduced to a cannibalistic beast who feeds on the corpses of friend and foe alike. And yet, beneath him, carrying his impossible weight with legs that should have buckled long ago, trots Leonard, a scrawny horse who has remained by his master's side through glory, through horror, through the very unraveling of sanity itself. Welcome, lore-seekers, to another journey through the lands between with Keen 7 lore, where today we uncover one of Elden Ring's most poignant tragedies, a story that spans from the heavens themselves to the simple bond between a warrior and his steed. This is the tale of how the strongest demigod in the Shattering learned to conquer the very stars, not for power, not for glory, but for love. It's a narrative that reveals how even in a world where gods wage war and the fabric of reality tears apart, the smallest acts of devotion can carry more weight than the cosmos itself. Picture, if you will, the absurdity of the scene before us. Radahn stands over 20 feet tall, his body corrupted and twisted by the scarlet rot that has eaten away at his flesh and mind for countless years. His great swords, each the size of a small building, carve through the earth with every swing. He is a force of nature, a living catastrophe. And beneath all that mass, all that power, all that madness is Leonard, unchanged, uncorrupted, simply doing what he has always done, carrying his friend. The physics of it shouldn't work. The logic of it makes no sense. And that, dear viewers, is precisely the point. Because Radahn, in his prime, in full possession of his faculties and power, looked at this impossibility and said, "I will remake the laws of reality itself before I abandon my companion." To understand the magnitude of this devotion, we must first journey back to when the lands between still knew something resembling peace, when a young prince with red hair looked up at the stars not knowing he would one day chain them in place. Radahn was born into greatness, the son of 2 legends whose union itself defied expectation. His mother, Rennala of the Full Moon, was the queen of the Carian royal family and one of the most powerful sorceresses to ever live. His father, Radahn, would later become the 2nd Elden Lord and eventually reveal himself to be Marika herself in a twist that still sends scholars into fits of confusion. From this union of magic and might came 3 children, each marked for a different fate, but none perhaps as dramatic as the red-haired giant who would grow to love 2 things above all else, the art of war and a small, unremarkable horse. The young Radahn didn't simply admire strength, he worshipped it in the form of Godfrey, the 1st Elden Lord. Where other children might have had toys or pets, Radahn had an obsession with the legendary warrior who had conquered the giants and established the Golden Order through pure, overwhelming force. He studied Godfrey's battles, adopted his lion motif as his own symbol, and dreamed of one day matching the First Lord's legendary prowess. The red plume that would later crown his helmet, the leonine imagery that decorated his armor, even his manner of speech. All of it traced back to a boy's hero, worship of a warrior who proved that strength alone could shake the foundations of the world. But somewhere in those early years, as Radahn trained to become the warrior he dreamed of being, Leonard entered his life. We don't know the exact circumstances of their meeting. Whether Leonard was a gift, a chance encounter, or perhaps a deliberate choice by a young prince who saw something in the small horse that others missed. What we do know, confirmed by the game's own descriptions and environmental storytelling, is that Leonard became Radahn's constant companion from youth onward. The name itself, Leonard, means brave lion in its ancient roots, a perfect match for a prince who wrapped himself in leonine imagery. Perhaps Radahn saw in this small, sturdy horse a reflection of the courage he aspired to, not the size of the body, but the strength of the heart. As years passed, something unexpected happened. Radahn grew, and grew, and continued growing far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. The Starscourge heirloom, a talisman that depicts Radahn and Leonard in earlier days, shows us a time when their proportions, while still mismatched, at least made sense. Radahn was large, yes, but not impossibly so. Leonard was small, certainly, but not comically tiny compared to his rider. But demigod blood flows differently than mortal veins, and Radahn's body expanded with his power, reaching heights that would dwarf even his fellow shard-bearers. By the time he reached his full size, Radahn stood as tall as a house, his weight measured not in pounds but in tons. Any reasonable person would have accepted the inevitable. A warhorse, perhaps, bred for size and strength. Or better yet, abandon mounted combat altogether. Surely a warrior of such magnitude needed no steed to prove his might. But Radahn looked at Leonard, this horse who had been with him since youth, who had carried him through his early training, who had been his companion before he was a general, before he was a conqueror, before he was anyone of importance, and made a decision that would reshape his entire approach to warfare and magic. He would not abandon Leonard, not for all the power in the lands between. This decision led Radahn down a path that few would have expected from a warrior who idolized physical might above all else. He sought out the Alabaster Lord, one of those ancient beings who had fallen to the lands between within a meteor, bringing with them knowledge of gravity sorceries from the void between the stars. The irony is delicious when you consider it. Radahn, who fashioned himself after Godfrey, the ultimate physical warrior, turning to sorcery, the domain of his mother's family that he had seemingly rejected in favor of pure strength. But this wasn't about following family tradition or exploring his magical heritage. This was about Leonard. The Alabaster Lord, dwelling in Celia, the town of sorcery, taught Radahn the fundamental principles of gravitational magic. These weren't simple tricks or minor adjustments to weight. Gravity sorcery, as practiced by the Alabaster and Onyx Lords, was about understanding the fundamental forces that held reality together. The invisible threads that pulled stars through the void, that kept feet planted on Earth, that governed the dance of celestial bodies across the cosmos. To master gravity was to master one of the universe's most fundamental forces, to reach out and grasp the very fabric that held existence in place. Radahn proved to be a prodigy, though perhaps that shouldn't surprise us. The same single-minded determination that drove him to model himself after Godfrey now focused entirely on mastering these cosmic forces. He learned to manipulate his own gravitational field, reducing his weight to almost nothing despite his massive size. Imagine the concentration required, the constant magical expenditure to maintain such a spell continuously. Every moment Radahn sat atop Leonard, he was actively defying physics, burning through magical energy that could have been used for devastating attacks or impenetrable defenses, or to spare his horse's back from his true weight. If you're finding value in uncovering these deep connections between love and cosmic power, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible as we explore how even the mightiest warriors in gaming can be driven by the smallest, most personal motivations. But Radahn's mastery of gravity didn't stop at making himself lighter. As he delved deeper into these cosmic sorceries, he discovered applications that would make him one of the most feared combatants in the lands between. The collapsing stars technique pulled enemies toward him with inexorable force. His crag-laid abilities allowed him to coat his massive swords in gravitational fields that could pulverize stone and armor alike. He learned to call down meteorites from the void, turning the battlefield into an apocalyptic hellscape. Yet all of these devastating techniques, all of this cosmic might, stemmed from that initial desire to continue riding Leonard. The duality is striking when you consider it. Here was a warrior who could literally pull stars from the sky, who commanded forces that governed the movement of planets and moons. and he used this unimaginable power primarily to be gentle. Every gravitational wave that reduced his weight for Leonard was a wave that could have crushed an enemy. Every moment of concentration spent maintaining his lightness was a moment that could have been used for destruction. Radahn chose tenderness over devastation, at least in this one aspect of his life. But mastering gravity sorcery for Leonard's sake was only the beginning of Radahn's relationship with the cosmic forces. As his power grew, so did his understanding of just how much influence these celestial mechanics had over the lands between. The stars weren't merely distant lights in the sky. They were active forces that shaped fate itself, especially for those of carrion blood like his own family. His sister Ranni's destiny was written in the stars. His mother Rennala drew her power from the moon. The very fabric of reality in the lands between was interwoven with stellar movement and celestial influence. This understanding led to what would become Radahn's most infamous act, the deed that earned him the title of Starscourge. Using the gravitational mastery he had developed, Radahn reached out beyond the earth, beyond the limits of what anyone thought possible, and seized hold of the stars themselves. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally. He grabbed the constellations in their courses and brought them to a halt. Every meteor that might have fallen to Earth, every shift in stellar alignment that might have changed someone's fate, every cosmic force that operated on celestial timing, all of it stopped, frozen in place by the will of a single demigod. The game confirms this through multiple sources. When we defeat Radahn, we witness stars suddenly resuming their movement across the sky. Meteor showers rain down that had been held back for who knows how long. A massive star falls and creates the crater that opens the path to Nokron, the Eternal City. These aren't gradual changes or subtle shifts. They're immediate, dramatic releases of cosmic forces that had been dammed up by Radahn's gravitational hold. But why? Why would Radahn, whose initial foray into gravity magic was motivated by love for Leonard, turn that power towards such a monumentally aggressive act as stopping the stars themselves? The game presents us with multiple possible motivations, and the truth likely involves elements of all of them. According to the famous lore researcher Vidya, one theory suggests Radahn was preventing the Nox, the underground civilization, from achieving their goal of bringing about the Age of Stars. The Nox had already created artificial life and weapons capable of harming the Greater Will itself. Allowing them access to falling stars, which could contain Alabaster lords or worse, might have given them the power to overthrow the entire Golden Order. Another interpretation focuses on the personal cost to Radahn's own family. By stopping the stars, he froze the fate of all carrion descendants, including his mother Rennala and his sister Ranni. Ranni explicitly needed the stars to move for her plans to reach fruition, plans that involved killing her own body and eventually overthrowing the Golden Order itself. Was Radahn protecting the current order by preventing his sister's schemes? Or was there a deeper game at play? The Shadow of the Erdtree DLC adds another layer to this mystery. We learn that Miquella had plans for Radahn, plans that involved him becoming a consort to the nascent god. By halting the stars, Radahn may have also been halting Miquella's fate, preventing certain conditions from aligning that would allow Miquella's ascension. The cosmic chess game grows ever more complex the deeper we dig. What's remarkable is that Radahn maintained this stellar blockade even after losing his mind to Scarlet rot. Think about the level of power and concentration required to hold back the entire cosmos, and then realize that Radahn was doing it unconsciously, automatically, even while reduced to a bestial state that could barely recognize friend from foe. The spell had become so ingrained, so fundamental to his being, that it continued functioning even as everything else about him crumbled away. This brings us to the Festival of War, one of the most fascinating traditions in the lands between. The Radahn Festival wasn't originally meant to be a mercy killing for a mad demigod. In better times, it was a celebration of strength, a gathering of warriors to honor the mightiest of the shard-bearers. Radahn himself had apparently made a pact with his faithful Castellan, Jaren, that should he ever fall beyond recovery, he should be given a warrior's death, an end worthy of his strength rather than a slow decay into nothingness. but the festival took on new meaning after the Battle of Aeonia. Now it served a dual purpose, to grant Radahn the honorable death he had wished for, and to free the stars from their chains. Champions would gather, knowing they faced almost certain death, because the promise of glory and the necessity of Radahn's defeat drew them like moths to a flame. Some came for honor, some for duty, some simply because the stars needed to move again for their own purposes. Throughout all of this cosmic drama, through the rise to power and the political machinations of demigods, Leonard remained. The small horse witnessed his master's transformation from ambitious prince to cosmic conqueror. He was there when Radahn learned his first gravity spell, reducing his weight for the first time. He was there during the campaigns of the Shattering, carrying Radahn through battles that decided the fate of nations. And he would be there for the event that would transform both of them into something tragic and terrible. The Shattering itself was a war unlike any the Lands Between had seen. When Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring and the demigods claimed the great runes for themselves, what followed was not a conventional conflict, but a war between beings with godlike power, each corrupted and driven mad by their fragments of the ring. Radahn claimed his great rune, and with it came power beyond imagining, but also the seeds of corruption that would eventually contribute to his downfall. His skin began to gray, his mind began to twist with the promise of power, yet through it all, his relationship with Leonard remained unchanged. During the war, Radahn proved himself perhaps the mightiest of all the shard-bearers. His red-maned knights became legendary for their discipline and loyalty. His gravitational powers allowed him to devastate battlefields in ways other demigods couldn't match. He could rain meteors from the sky, pull entire formations of enemies into his massive blades, and move across battlefields with a speed that belied his enormous size. And through every charge, every battle, every victory, Leonard was there beneath him, carrying not just Radahn's physical form, but serving as a reminder of who Radahn was before the power, before the corruption, before the madness that touched all who claimed pieces of the Elden Ring. As the Shattering progressed and demigods fell one by one, it became clear that only two possessed the strength to potentially claim victory, Radahn and Malenia, Blade of Miquella. Malenia had never known defeat, her skill with the blade unmatched, her determination absolute. She marched south with her clean-wrought knights, seeking to challenge the strongest of her siblings and clear the path for her brother Miquella's ascension. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the very landscape of the Lands Between. The Battle of Aeonia began with the clash of two armies, but ended with only two figures standing in a field of corpses. Radahn's red-maned knights fell to Malenia's clean-wrought knights, who in turn were crushed by Radahn's gravitational fury. The lesser soldiers on both sides were simply erased, caught between forces that exceeded mortal comprehension. In the end, it came down to the two mightiest demigods, neither able to overcome the other through conventional means. We know from the game's lore that they fought to a standstill. Malenia's blade work was perfection itself, but Radahn's massive swords and gravitational control gave him reach and power she couldn't fully overcome. Radahn's strength was overwhelming, but Malenia's speed and precision meant he couldn't land a decisive blow. They were perfect opposites, canceling each other out in a deadly equilibrium that threatened to continue forever. It was then that Malenia made the choice that would curse an entire region. She broke the unalloyed gold needle that had been keeping her scarlet rot in check, the needle crafted by her brother Miquella to hold back the outer god's influence that had marked her from birth. As the needle shattered, the scarlet rot bloomed from her in a flower of unspeakable beauty and horror. The scarlet Aeonia, a divine manifestation of decay itself. But before the bloom, in that moment between decision and devastation, Malenia whispered something to Radahn. The game files, data mined by dedicated investigators in the community, reveal her words. "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." These words transform our understanding of the entire battle. Was this conflict orchestrated? Had Miquella chosen Radahn for some greater purpose, and was Malenia's assault meant to prepare him for that role? The implications are staggering and add layers of tragedy to what followed. The Scarlet Aeonia bloomed across the battlefield, and with it came the transformation of Caelid from a verdant land into a hellscape of rot and decay. The very air became poison. The earth itself was corrupted, transforming into something alien and hostile to life. The wildlife mutated into monstrous forms. The sky turned a perpetual crimson, as if the land itself was bleeding into the atmosphere. Radahn was caught at the epicenter of this bloom. The scarlet rot invaded his body, beginning its terrible work immediately. This wasn't a poison that could be resisted or a curse that could be broken. This was divine corruption from an outer god, spreading through his flesh and into his mind. It began consuming him from the inside out, eating away at his sanity even as it ravaged his body. The greatest warrior of the Shattering was being hollowed out by a force that cared nothing for his strength or skill. Yet even as the rot consumed him, even as his mind began to fragment and dissolve, two things remained constant. First, his gravitational hold on the stars never wavered. The spell he had cast was so deeply ingrained, so fundamental to his magical essence, that it continued even as everything else about him crumbled. Second, and perhaps more remarkably, was Leonard. The small horse was also infected by the scarlet rot. We can see the signs of corruption on his body. But unlike the massive beasts of Caelid that were transformed into monstrosities, Leonard remained essentially himself, still carrying Radahn, still loyal beyond reason or survival instinct. Malenia, spent from unleashing the Scarlet Aeonia, had to be carried from the battlefield by clean rot knight Finlay, who would become legendary for successfully bringing the unconscious demigod all the way back to the Erdtree. The battle had no victor in any conventional sense. Malenia had prevented Radahn from achieving victory, but at the cost of unleashing an outer god's influence and corrupting an entire region. Radahn had survived the Scarlet Bloom, but at the cost of his mind and humanity. What remained in Caelid was something that shouldn't exist. Radahn, now completely mad from the rot's influence, began to feast on the corpses of the fallen, friend and foe alike. He became a cannibal, driven by base instincts that the rot had reduced him to. His legendary tactical mind was gone. His noble bearing was erased. All that remained was hunger, rage, and instinct. He would attack anything that moved, howling at the sky in wordless fury, charging across the dunes in an endless, meaningless patrol of a battlefield that had long since been abandoned. And through all of this horror, through the complete degradation of everything that made Radahn who he was, Leonard continued to carry him. The horse, also infected with rot, also technically dead or something close to it, maintained his duty. Every charge across the wailing dunes, every mad dash toward a new victim, every moment of Radahn's descent into bestial madness was supported by those small, steady hooves. The game describes them both as essentially zombified, kept in a state between life and death by the scarlet rot, eternally bound together in their corruption. The spell that Radahn had learned to spare Leonard's back never failed. Even in complete madness, even while cannibalizing corpses, even while his mind was completely gone, the gravitational magic that made him light enough for Leonard to carry continued to function. Think about what this means. At the most fundamental level, deeper than consciousness, deeper than sanity, deeper than everything else that made Radahn who he was, existed the desire not to hurt Leonard. It was so core to his being that even scarlet rot, even divine corruption from an outer god, couldn't erase it. This is where the tragedy reaches its apex. Not in any conscious way, not through any deliberate choice, but through a magic so deeply ingrained that it had become autonomous, as natural and unconscious as breathing. When we finally encounter them in the game, when we answer the summons to the Radahn festival and face the mad general on the battlefield, we're not really fighting Radahn anymore. We're fighting what's left of him, a hollow shell animated by rot and rage, still clinging to the last two things that defined him, his hold on the stars and his love for Leonard. The festival has become a mercy not just for Radahn, but for Leonard too, trapped in this eternal vigil, carrying a friend who no longer remembers him but cannot bear to hurt him. The battle itself is legendary among players. We face Radahn on a massive battlefield, with multiple champions summoned to assist us, because even in his degraded state, even mad and rotting, Radahn is still one of the most powerful beings in the lands between. He opens the fight by firing gravity-enhanced arrows that track our movement, each one capable of instant death if it connects. When we close the distance, his massive swords cleave through the earth itself. And in his second phase, he leaps into the sky and comes crashing down as a meteor, using the very gravitational powers he learned for Leonard's sake as a weapon of devastating destruction. Throughout the entire fight, Leonard is there. The small horse charges across the battlefield, seemingly oblivious to the danger, focused only on carrying his master. When Radahn leaps into the sky for his meteor attack, Leonard continues running, positioning himself to catch Radahn when he lands. It's both heartbreaking and absurd, this tiny horse supporting this corrupted giant through their final battle. When we finally defeat Radahn, when the last blow falls and the mad general collapses, multiple things happen simultaneously. First, the stars begin to move again. We see them streak across the sky, resuming paths that had been frozen for years. Meteors that had been held in stasis come crashing down, including the massive one that opens the path to Nokron. Ranni's fate, frozen since Radahn seized the stars, can finally progress. The cosmic machinery of the layers between shudders back into motion. But what happens to Leonard? When Radahn falls, Leonard simply vanishes. Not in a burst of light or magical dissolution, but just gone, as if he was never there at all. Some players interpret this as Leonard finally being released from his duty, free to rest after carrying his master through glory and horror alike. Others see it as evidence that Leonard had died long ago, that what we saw was merely Radahn's gravitational magic puppeting a corpse, unable to let go even in madness. The game doesn't give us a clear answer, and perhaps that's fitting. The ambiguity allows us to decide for ourselves what we want to believe about the fate of this brave, loyal horse. The immediate aftermath of Radahn's defeat ripples throughout the lands between. Ranni can now pursue her plan to usher in the Age of Stars. The Nox gain access to the surface world through the crater at Nokron. Creatures and forces that had been held back by Radahn's gravitational barrier begin to manifest. The cosmic order that Radahn had forcibly maintained through will alone collapses, and change, long postponed, rushes in like a flood. But the story doesn't quite end there. The Shadow of the Erdtree DLC reveals another chapter, one that recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about Radahn's fate. We learn that Miquella had plans for Radahn that extended beyond death. The whisper, Malenia spoke. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort, wasn't just dramatic flourish, it was a promise, or perhaps a threat, of resurrection and transformation. In the DLC, we discover that Miquella intended for Radahn to become his consort, to stand beside him as he ascended to godhood. The battle at Aeonia, the Scarlet Rot, even Radahn's death, all of it might have been orchestrated as part of Miquella's grand design. The implications are stunning. Was Radahn's entire tragedy, his corruption and madness, just a step in someone else's plan? Did Leonard carry his master through all that horror only for Radahn to be pulled back from death's peace into another's ambition? The Shadow of the Erdtree presents us with Radahn reborn, his soul placed in Mohg's body, transformed into something that serves Miquella's purpose. But notably, Leonard is absent from this resurrection. Whatever bond existed between horse and rider, it belonged to the original Radahn, not this reconstructed version. Leonard's absence speaks volumes. This new Radahn, for all his power, lacks the essential humanity that Leonard represented. He's a tool, a weapon, a consort, but not the friend who learned gravity magic to spare a horse's back. This final transformation adds yet another layer of tragedy to Radahn's story. Even death wasn't an escape. Even the mercy granted by the festival champions was temporary. But in a strange way, it also validates the importance of Leonard to Radahn's identity. The resurrected Radahn might have the general's memories and power, but without Leonard, he's incomplete. missing the heart that made the original Radahn more than just a warrior. Looking back across the full scope of this narrative, what strikes me most is how it inverts our expectations about power and meaning in a fantasy epic. In a game filled with gods and cosmic forces, where the fate of reality itself hangs in the balance, one of the most memorable and emotionally resonant storylines centers on a warrior who didn't want to give up his horse. All of Radahn's cosmic achievements, his legendary strength, his ability to hold back the stars themselves, all of it stems from this simple, pure motivation. The story asks us to consider what we value and what we're willing to sacrifice for power. Radahn could have abandoned Leonard at any point. It would have been the logical choice, the practical choice. He could have channeled all that gravitational magic into pure combat prowess. He could have been even mightier without the constant drain of maintaining his weight reduction spell. But he chose love over logic, companionship over convenience, loyalty over leverage. This choice humanizes Radahn in a way that pure displays of strength never could. We can't relate to being able to hold back the stars. We can't imagine wielding swords the size of buildings or calling down meteors from the void. But we can understand not wanting to abandon a friend. We can empathize with going to extraordinary lengths to maintain a relationship that matters to us. We can comprehend the grief of watching someone we love lose themselves to disease while being powerless to help them. The parallelism between Radahn and the player character is also worth noting. We too have a spectral steed, Torrid, who carries us through the lands between, despite our growing power. We too could probably manage without our mount as we become stronger. But the game makes traversal and combat significantly more dynamic with Torrid's presence. In a way, Radahn's story serves as an extreme version of our own journey, showing what happens when the bond between rider and mount is taken to its absolute limit. The environmental storytelling in Caelid reinforces these themes constantly. The entire region is a monument to love and tragedy. The red sky, the rotted earth, the corrupted wildlife. All of it exists because Radahn refused to yield and Malenia was forced to unleash something terrible to stop him. But even in this hellscape, we find the red-maned soldiers still maintaining their posts, still loyal to their general, even though he's long past recognizing them. We find the festival grounds maintained and ready, waiting for champions to come grant their lord an honorable death. Everyone around Radahn, from his soldiers to his horse, displays a loyalty that transcends reason. The game presents Radahn's story without moral judgment, allowing players to interpret the ethics of his choices themselves. Was it selfish to hold back the stars, freezing fate for countless beings, just to maintain the cosmic order he preferred? Was it noble to learn gravity magic for Leonard, or was it a refusal to accept natural limitations that led to greater suffering? Did his love for Leonard humanize him, or did it blind him to greater responsibilities? These questions don't have easy answers, and that ambiguity enriches the narrative. From a thematic perspective, Radahn embodies the collision between the personal and the cosmic that defines much of Elden Ring storytelling. The game consistently shows us how individual relationships and choices ripple outward to affect entire civilizations. Radahn's desire to keep riding Leonard led to him mastering gravity magic, which led to him holding back the stars, which froze fate for countless beings, which necessitated his death to allow the world to move forward. One small act of love created cosmic consequences. This interconnectedness extends to the game's broader meditation on power and corruption. Every demigod in Elden Ring is transformed by their great rune, twisted into an exaggerated version of their core nature. But Radahn's corruption is unique because it strips away everything except his two defining characteristics, his gravitational hold on the stars and his protection of Leonard. Even in madness, even reduced to a beast, these two aspects persist. It suggests that these weren't just things Radahn did, but fundamental aspects of who he was at the deepest level. The community's response to Radahn and Leonard's story has been remarkable. In a game filled with complex lore about outer gods, metaphysical concepts, and elaborate conspiracies, this simple tale of a warrior and his horse has captured imaginations in a way that few other storylines have. Fan art depicting Radahn and Leonard in happier times fills social media. Discussions about whether Leonard was aware of Radahn's condition spark passionate debates. The image of tiny Leonard carrying massive Radahn has become one of the game's most iconic visuals, simultaneously absurd and touching. This reaction speaks to something fundamental about storytelling. We connect most strongly not with displays of power, but with displays of humanity. Radahn conquering the stars is impressive. Radahn refusing to abandon his horse is memorable. The contrast between his cosmic might and his personal loyalty creates a character that transcends the usual fantasy warrior archetype. As we reflect on this tale, it's worth considering what From Software achieved with Radahn and Leonard's relationship. In a genre often criticized for prioritizing spectacle over emotion, they created a story that uses spectacle in service of emotion. The impossible sight of Leonard carrying Radahn isn't just visually striking, it's a constant reminder of the love that drove Radahn to reshape reality itself. Every battle with Radahn isn't just a boss fight, it's a mercy killing of someone whose last act of sanity was ensuring he could never hurt his friend. The developers have spoken about Radahn in interviews, with Hidetaka Miyazaki himself calling Radahn's reasoning for learning gravity magic adorable. That word choice is telling. In a game filled with horror and tragedy, the director sees something adorable in this massive warrior's dedication to his tiny horse. It reveals an intentionality behind the emotional core of this story. This wasn't an accident or a bit of random lore. This was deliberately crafted to make us feel something beyond the usual triumph of defeating a boss. The story also serves as a meditation on different types of strength. Radahn possessed physical might that could challenge the gods themselves. He commanded magical forces that could alter the cosmos. He led armies that reshaped nations. But perhaps his greatest strength was his loyalty, his refusal to abandon someone who mattered to him regardless of the cost. In a world where power corrupts absolutely, where every demigod fell to madness and ambition, Radahn's corruption left his love intact. That's a different kind of strength, one that transcends physical or magical might. Consider, too, the tragedy of potential unfulfilled. Radahn could have been the greatest of the Elden Lords. He had the strength, the tactical brilliance, the loyalty of his soldiers, and the magical power to rule. But he was brought low, not by weakness, but by the collision between unstoppable forces. His own might and Malenia's determination. The scarlet rot that consumed him represents the arbitrary cruelty of fate, the way disease and corruption can strike down even the mightiest without regard for their strength or virtue. Yet even in this tragedy, even reduced to a mad beast haunting a poisoned wasteland, the essence of who Radahn was persisted through Leonard. Every moment that Leonard carried him was a reminder that Radahn had once been more than a monster. Every step those small hooves took across the corrupted sands of Caelid was a testament to a love that transcended madness, rot, and even death itself. The ending of their story, with Leonard vanishing when Radahn falls, carries its own poignant ambiguity. If Leonard was alive until that moment, then he stayed with Radahn through years of madness, through the complete dissolution of his friend's identity, carrying him until the very end. If Leonard had died earlier and was being puppeted by Radahn's magic, then even in madness Radahn couldn't let go, couldn't accept that his friend was gone. Either interpretation adds another layer of tragedy to an already heartbreaking tale. In the greater context of Elden Ring's narrative, Radahn and Leonard represent one of the few relationships in the game that remained pure despite the corruption that touched everything else. Parents betrayed children. Siblings murdered each other, spouses turned on one another, but a warrior and his horse remained true. In a world where the gods themselves were flawed, and where every victory came with terrible cost, this one simple relationship stood as a reminder of what loyalty really means. As we reach the conclusion of this exploration into one of gaming's most touching tragedies, it's worth taking a moment to appreciate the artistry involved in creating this narrative. From Software took what could have been a simple boss fight against a mad demigod and transformed it into a meditation on love, loyalty, and the price of power. They showed us that even in a dark fantasy setting, even in a world of cosmic horror and divine corruption, there's room for stories that touch the heart as much as they challenge the reflexes. The tale of Radahn and Leonard resonates because it speaks to universal themes wrapped in fantastic imagery. We all have our Leonards, those relationships we refuse to abandon, those bonds we maintain against all logic, those loves that define us more than our achievements ever could. Radahn's story asks us what we would do to maintain those connections. How far would we go? What would we sacrifice? What powers would we master or unleash? These questions become even more poignant when we consider that Radahn's story didn't end with his death. The shadow of the Erdtree's revelation that Miquella had orchestrated events to claim Radahn as a consort adds a violation to the tragedy. Even in death, Radahn couldn't escape the machinations of others. But significantly, this resurrected Radahn lacks Leonard. Without his horse, without that grounding relationship, he becomes just another tool in someone else's plan. The absence of Leonard in Radahn's resurrection might be the strongest statement about what truly mattered in his life. Thank you for joining me in uncovering this tale of cosmic power and simple devotion. The story of General Radahn and Leonard reminds us that sometimes the smallest companions carry the weight of the mightiest hearts. In a game that asks us to kill gods and reshape reality, perhaps the most godlike act is the simple choice to remain loyal to those who matter to us, no matter the cost. If this deep dive into one of Elden Ring's most poignant relationships resonated with you, please consider subscribing to Kane 7 Lore. Together, we explore the hidden depths of gaming's greatest narratives, uncovering the human hearts beating beneath the armor of legends. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Radahn's love for Leonard justified the cosmic consequences of his actions? Was freezing the stars worth maintaining this bond? And what do you think happened to Leonard in those final moments? Until we meet again in the lands between, remember that true strength isn't always measured in the enemies we can defeat or the forces we can command. Sometimes, true strength is found in the bonds we refuse to break, the friends we refuse to abandon, and the love that persists even when everything else falls away. This has been Kane 7 Lore, and may you find your own Leonard in your journeys ahead. That one constant star in a sky full of chaos, that one friend who carries you through your battles, no matter how heavy the burden becomes.